What is up, y'all? Bud Elliott here of the Nolecast, and this is not an instant reaction. It is just a podcast coming off the bye week. So let's get that logo on the screen there. Appreciate you guys if you're watching on YouTube, giving us that thumbs up and the like as we look to add more guests to the show and spice things up a little bit. Just as we'll see, maybe FSU will spice things up after the bye week, which they're just coming off. And I know they practiced and they had a little break, and now they got more guys coming back. And we'll just kind of see what this team looks like in the second half of this season. As disastrous as this season has been so far, I don't have a lot of hope for the second half of the season, but I am hopeful to learn some things, I guess you could say, in this second half of the season. Will we learn some things? Probably. Will those things be things that we'd like to learn? I don't know. Maybe so. I do know one thing though. Well, actually, I know a couple things, but one thing I know is that the legendary team, Chad, does an awesome job with home loans. 844 FSU loan. That's 844 FSU loan. Be a part of the legendary team. Closing in on 600 Nolecast listeners have decided to. I'm two of those. I guess I count as a listener, right? I do try to listen back to see just how good or bad the product is. And it's just an awesome experience, right? Customer service, great rates, special help as well, available for veterans, first responders, all that kind of good stuff for everybody who helps. Obviously, people who have helped out during the recent hurricane times as well. 844 FSU loan is the number to call. So a couple of Patreon questions tonight I wanted to get to, patreon.com/Nolecast, and a couple questions that a couple of my coaching buddies across college football had asked me because they know I'm an FSU guy. The first was, hey, dude, like, do you think there are going to be jobs coming open on that staff? I was like, yeah, I'm not exactly sure which ones, but if people are like, oh, nobody wants to come coach at Florida State, I don't think that's the case, actually. If you look at it from the feedback I got, I do think there are good coaches who would want to come coach in Tallahassee. And I think they would be pretty interested. And I think that Mike Norvell overall has the reputation still within the coaching industry of a guy who you do want to work for. So is this season going to complete hell? It is. There's no doubt about it. It sucks. Did some people's season tickets get moved because of construction and like that adds to the angst? Of course. Will good coaches still want to come make good money and coach for Mike Norvell? Yeah, I think they probably will. So if you are someone who believes this can get turned around, and we'll see if it can, at least back to the hopes and the heights that I think you hoped that FSU had had, it starts there. Getting better coaches in who have a higher kind of self-drive, I think, for recruiting, but also maybe they work together a little bit better than this staff did. Maybe they relate to players a little bit better than this staff did. So that was one thing that I was getting asked by them this week. The other thing was like, hey, dude, is Brock Glenn, like, is he going to be the starter next year? Because if not, there's some teams who were very, very interested in looking at Brock Glenn after I did that latest Nolecast, and they went and saw that he was one of the highest graded PFF players in the whole country in his lone start. And that lone start happened to come against the Clemson Tigers. So pretty exciting stuff there. I'd be interested to see if he can keep that going this week at Duke. Keep in mind, it's also really like the first week where you've had a real install for Brock Glenn, something that's really actually geared more towards him. And what does that mean? Well, he's a much better runner than DJ was, or I guess certainly than he is. Does that mean you're going to run Brock Glenn 10 times? No, probably not. But can you keep the defense honest a little bit more? Maybe so, possibly. Do you get to work with Glenn more on stuff that he's comfortable with, and maybe just call the game for him with nobody looking over his shoulder? Obviously, we'll get to some depth chart changes in a minute. Some stuff Mike Norvell said that I want to read into a little bit, but no DJ on the depth chart now. This is Brock Glenn's game, at least as I understand it. So I'll be interested to see how he plays coming up and see just how good he does or how poorly. All right, so Norvell talked today and this week at his presser about like how may want to change up some things schematically, as certain personnel dictates it. I don't think there are like magic bullet answers for this team. Okay, some of the guys that you signed in the transfer portal just. Whereas previously you've had stuff where it's like, yeah, that's probably like the 90th percentile outcome for a kid that you could possibly reach, maybe a Jermaine Johnson, a Braden Fisk. anything you could possibly hope to get out of them, you would. Some of the guys you took this year have that more like 10th percentile outcome, and that's unacceptably low. And even though we had noted on this show, uh, and I think Graham obviously knew it too, and said so, that like their hit rate in the portal was not sustainable. But that doesn't mean that it had to plummet like it did. They just didn't do a good job this year on evaluating the talent. I think they had a little bit too much trust in their evaluations out of high school, which I don't think have been special overall. Now I think they have been decent actually in some cases, but I don't think they've been like such the nuts, to steal a poker term, that they're worth throwing away whatever sample set a kid has from practice film or whatever at Alabama. Guys from those schools do bust too, and I'll be interested to see what the transfer portal process this upcoming season looks like for the Noles, because at least like the research that I've seen says that taking these guys who can't start at your big time programs, more often than not, and this is not perfect, it's not a lock, but more often than not, it's not working out for schools. Like these guys are busting or failing to get on the field at their current school for a reason. Now, of course, sometimes that's just a really good reason. Like there's an NFL player in front of you. You could think of like legendary Seminoles who would have probably used the transfer portal back in the day because they couldn't get on the field until year 4. And then after year 4, they went first round in the NFL draft. It just kind of happens to work that way at times. So I am interested to see how they change things up scheme wise, personnel wise. The depth chart had some interesting changes though. And basically, I think you can just kind of call it more of a youth movement. Now, part of this is injury related, of course. It's like look at your guard spots. Your starting left guard is now Andre Otto. Your starting right guard is now Jalen Early. Okay, that's clearly like some youth movement, but also like some desperation due to injury stuff that you've had to deal with. But let's think about what those guys do well and what they don't. Like they're both considerably more athletic than dudes like Jones or uh, shoot the kid you got from Florida, or I honestly like from a run blocking athleticism standpoint, probably a good bit better than Ferguson, who you got from Alabama. So maybe more guys on the move there from those guard spots because you do have better athletes now. And that'll be interesting to see how they match up against Duke. Duke is extremely aggressive. In fact, they're running something that is very close to what SMU runs on defense. I don't know if you guys knew that or not, but that they're kind of the same family tree. It's a Manny Diaz team. You've certainly seen that before, and that's going to be very aggressive. And at receiver, it's Hakeem with his own starting spot, no or designated on the depth chart. On the other side, you got a couple young guys mixed in, McCoy, Brown, as well as Malik Benson, who is still there, like he's still playing, but he's not being depended on to be a one or a two for you at this point. And that's I think that's a real disappointment, to be honest. How do I say this? There were certainly guys at Florida State who thought Benson was going to be a one and was going to be a really good player in the ACC. And I had discussions with folks, and I was like, look, I don't think so. I think that there is some chance that he could be a two on a good team or a one on like a bad team, but you don't fail to get on the field at Alabama that much from an offense that struggled at times last year at the receiver spot. At times, I mean, they did have Isaiah Bond, who's like one of the best receivers in the whole country, and then obviously they had the kid who decked the girl when Tennessee stormed the field and now is in the NFL. So it's not like they had no talent there, but they certainly didn't have maybe like what Bama used to have like 7 or 8 years ago when they were winning the win the national title with those trios, Waddle and Smith and all those dudes. So interesting there with receiver and with guard. I thought that was something to take a look at. Also interesting, Kirkland is now going to be the other starter at safety, and they're switching him to the other safety spot. So that's interesting. We'll see how much Shaheem Brown continues to play. He's had some real up and down games this year. Guy that's cost himself quite a bit of money, at least according to my untrained scouting eye. But this kind of makes sense. And some people had speculated, like, when would you go ahead and go with the youth movement? And ultimately doing so during the bye week makes the most sense. Would they have run DJU out there potentially if he had not gotten hurt against Clemson? I guess maybe like you would have run him out against Clemson, but I think now is the time, obviously, to go to the youth movement. It looks like in as many spots as they're able, they are doing that. Lundy's off the depth chart. I'm sure you guys saw that news. So it's going to be Cryer and Graham there for the most part, I guess. I'm not super fired up about that, but Lundy obviously wasn't playing great either. So we'll have to see how that goes. But there are a lot of young players now to evaluate as this season wraps up. And this is what I'm most excited for. Getting to see more of Williams, getting to see more of Thomas, getting to see what you have. If you do end up having like two really nice tight ends, okay. And maybe one of like Hakeem, Brown, McCoy, maybe they emerge and become like a real dude. Well, then I think it's entirely plausible that your 2025 weapons are a good bit better than your 2024 weapons, right? Um, getting to see young guys like Otto and early in there on the offensive line. Maybe Lucas Simmons gets to play some at some point. I don't know. I think he's obviously a year behind because of the medical thing, but getting to evaluate more of these young players, seeing if Brock Glenn can have another strong game. I'm sure he will have another strong game at some point this year. Do I think it's going to happen against Duke? I don't know. Like that's a not talent wise necessarily at all spots, but style wise, that's an interesting game to go play. So we'll have to see how Mike Norvell can scheme stuff up. If he can, what different can they do for Brock Glenn? We'll have the game preview as well for this coming up. But I thought that was pretty interesting, And I also want to point out, like, this team by FSU standards flat out sucks. It does. Like there's no doubt about that. Okay. We have not seen a lot of congruity in this team. What we have seen a lot of, though, is congruity helping out our listeners and viewers. Congruityhr.com/Knowles. That's congruityhr.com/Knowles. If you want to optimize your business, you give Matt Lewis a call. That guy crushes, does an awesome job for us. If you run a business, payroll, HR solutions, whatever you might need, logistics for your business, they can help to optimize what you do. Make sure you have that congruityhr.com/Knowles. So if I was to tell you that Florida State was I don't know, like somewhere between the fifth best team and the 15th best team in the ACC, I honestly could defend that position. I know that sounds insane, and I get it, but like, who is shown on a week to week basis that they are clearly better than you? I mean, is it Boston College, who almost lost to Michigan State and did lose to Virginia? Is it Syracuse that really like luck boxed their way to two wins back to back weeks against UNLV, and especially last weekend against NC State? Is it NC State, which has zero good games so far this season and almost lost to Northern Illinois at home? Is it? Well, it's certainly not Wake Forest. Like, Wake Forest looks like the worst team in the conference by a mile. It's not Stanford. Almost every one of these teams in sort of that like 6 to 15 range is pretty similarly rated, to be honest. Like it's not UNC, which lost by 30 to JMU and gave up 70 something points at home. So Duke 5-1. Somehow they just keep winning these close games over and over and over again. It's kind of a miracle, and they face multiple backup quarterbacks on the season, et cetera. My point is, like, Pitt so far has had like 3 pick sixes on the year dropped, and in fact, this weekend won a game in which their quarterback was like 12 of 28 with no touchdowns and 2 interceptions because Cal can't kick a field goal and Cal can't manage a clock at the end of the game. Georgia Tech almost lost on the field to UNC. They've screwed around quite a bit. They beat you in Ireland. This is not me defending this team. I'm just saying, like, the compression in this sport, if you slip, is pretty wild. I think I've given this example on Cover 3 before, also on my newsletter, but I think it's apt here, and I want to talk about this. So in 2021, before the portal and before like NIL and all this stuff, guys, the 125th rated team was like a -24 from a power rating standpoint. Now it's like a -18 roughly. It's like 2 field goals better. So the bad teams are getting better, and the good teams, for the most part, They are getting worse. Like they're not quite as good as they used to be, which means if you're not like a super elite squad, you can kind of lose to almost anybody on any given weekend, which is kind of interesting. So, wanted to point that out. I don't think it really helps you feel better about this team because again, you don't donate to the Battle's End to be, just an okay ACC team. You don't put your money up for your ticket licenses and your season tickets in Tallahassee to support a team that is like just below average in the ACC. And they're probably like dead last standings wise. I get it. I mean, they're 1-5 on the year, and yet they'd be favored on a neutral site over like quite a few of the teams that have better records than them because just talent, because they had not had a lot of like breather games so far. Again, but if you're a good team, then Boston College is your breather game. You're not a good team this year. So that's on you, like not really totally the schedule maker. Um, so let me see what else are my notes here. Just trying to stay big picture stuff. Like 'cause I don't know how many people are following this team on a day to day basis. A lot of praise for Brock. I'm curious to see if he can keep that going. Will they be able to like work Luke in some packages? I'd like to see that too. Honestly, I want to see both of them in games just to see kind of how they look. I also want to point out here that you have been a poorly playing team so far this year, but also um, you've also been unlucky, like legitimately so. Florida State is 120th in EPA lost to turnovers this season. That's basically like taking into account for like time of game, down, distance, expected points, etc. Like what happens? Like what are the magnitude, the importance, like the size of your turnovers? And FSU this year is 120th. Now, it's not the worst in the country. Obviously, there are some who are worse. I mean, App State and Temple are dead last, and just unbelievable numbers from those two. But like Auburn, right? Auburn's not a bad team. They're not a good team, but they're just like a decent top 35-ish, top 30, type team in the country as far as their play style, their play level, their quality of play. And yeah, I don't know what Auburn's record is. Probably like 2-4, maybe 3-3 or whatever. Like they're probably not going to make a bowl at this point because they just keep having backbreaking turnovers. And some of that is certainly skill, but we do know that turnovers are also a bit of luck. Now, they're not 100% luck. We know that because some coaches, some defensive coordinators are better at scheming stuff that confuses the opponent. In fact, like people have talked about just how good of a job Venables did to scheme Tua into like 3 picks in the national title game when Clemson destroyed Alabama. They had held some stuff back the entire year, and then they showed certain looks, and they ran something completely different out of that look than that team had run basically all season. So uh, I don't, I'm not willing to write off FSU's failure to create some turnovers, in particular interceptions and strip fumbles, right? Like guys coming totally clean on a quarterback or interceptions where the quarterback is confused. I'm not willing to write that off as just purely luck. Uh, Nor am I willing to write off FSU's offensive turnover problems as purely luck. Although a little more there because I do think that is, it's not like you're facing the same DC every week who can just kind of pick and choose what he wants to run. But you have been a little bit unlucky in addition to not playing well. You're not, I don't think anybody who's bottom 14 in the country in turnover EPA is just purely there off skill. I mean, there's some bad teams around this number for sure, but like there's some teams that are pretty decent. Penn State is 90th. That's a good football team. They just have had really bad breaks. You know who else is 91st in turnover EPA? Oregon Ducks, the number 2 team in the country. So maybe they've been a little bit unlucky so far this year. All right, a couple more things that people have asked over on the Patreon. Should Norvell hire a quote real OC? If the answer is yes, do you think he will? I don't know. Like to me, that would depend on if he thinks he's too distracted in games to have somebody call the game. Obviously, I don't think with the way the season's gone that would be Alex Atkins. At one point, I think it definitely was going to be. So we'll kind of have to see like how that situation is managed if he wants to. I mean, I Norvell they struggled some last year on offense. This year, clearly, like, although it was still good. Like people didn't like how it looked, but it was still effective. It was still one of the top, both in terms of points, advanced analytics, all that kind of stuff. Still one of the best in the country before Jordan Travis went down, and that's a pretty big loss. I mean, you lose your Heisman candidate uh, type quarterback, that's going to hurt. So, what else do we have here? Is FSU just running the same four plays: counter screen, RPO, and rollout corner? No, they've actually done quite a few different things. I would probably pare it down some with Brock Glenn and just run stuff that you're fairly sure you can execute. And if it's too obvious, it's too obvious. But like what is obvious right now is the inability for them to execute on a consistent basis. So we'll have to see how some of that changes. Can the defensive staff just not teach zone? Yeah, I mean, look, they definitely play some like match quarters type stuff, but overall, they do not do a good job of selling one look and then bring something else consistently enough. Quarterbacks do not seem to be all that confused against this defense. This is a complaint that I have had in 2020, 2021, a good bit of 2022. Not much in 2023 when you had a defense where almost every single player was getting drafted. Actually, interesting. And now the complaint has returned some in 2024. So personally, I do think there's something there that needs to be looked at. Like, why are they not good at creating confusion? I don't know. Uh, do they need to get better quality coaches? I think so. Yeah, probably so. All right. Do you think they have communication issues on defense because they sub so many players? This is a good one. I've never actually really thought about this. I'm not saying that the answer is yes. I just have not really contemplated that. They do play a lot of guys for sure, but so do some other teams that I don't think suck on defense. So I don't know. Um, anyway, kind of a boring season and a bad season. Like there's not a lot of like really good stuff right now to keep going over and beating the drum on, which sucks if you're doing an FSU podcast, to be honest. Although I'd rather they just be good and boring. I can cover that. Or if they suck and also really interesting, that's also good to cover. Bad and boring, that ain't good. Youth movement on the depth chart, a commitment to Brock Glenn, Mike Norvell saying they have to consider whatever changes they need to make. That's encouraging. You know what else is encouraging? The scene at Charlie Park rooftop, awesome spot. Drinks, dinner, brunch, special events, reservations, recommended getting them for sure, especially like, if you got a graduation coming up or something like that. Maybe, you're going up, you want to take your son or daughter out for a nice time. Definitely hit that up. Charlie Park rooftop, awesome spot there. Our friend Matt Thompson also does Township and does Madison, where we always stop in when we are in town. So that's pretty much what I got for this little shorty episode. Back with the one on Thursday to preview the ball game. Probably Thursday, like afternoonish, I would think. I guess we'll see on that. Florida State fighting to not be in the doghouse for the ACC. I guess you could be worse. Like you could be Wake, which is an underdog to UConn this weekend. So, but again, nobody wants to take solace in not being Wake because this is Florida State, and we should not lose sight of that. Like we can joke about some of this stuff, sure, but ultimately, like that's not cool. They're gonna have to make some important changes here. They're probably gonna have to hurt some feelings. Have to make some to get some guys that you know if you had kind of gone like what if you had gone 9-3? Would some changes have been made last year for guys that I think a lot of us have kind of wondered, like, is this really an FSU quality assistant coach? But it's hard to say that when a team goes 13-0, because then you're like, because you don't work for them. Like, okay, like this doesn't seem like a guy anybody else wants to hire away from you. But you're telling me that the chemistry and that kind of stuff here really matters and is accounted for. Okay, like I think you have to seed and really realize that they probably should have superior knowledge to you. Now, is that superior knowledge being used? Is it being used appropriately, effectively? I don't know. We will see if they make some important changes coming up, but that's more talk for November, I think. I don't really know what you want to talk about. We haven't had a single firing yet in college football so far this season, at least not head coach one. So I don't think we're going to have a whole lot of coordinator movement in the month of October. So anyway, I appreciate you guys listening. I'll hit you guys back up in about 48 hours, maybe a little sooner. We will see. Take care. It's been the Nolecast.